Thrones is kind of an awkward poem to discuss on YouTube because it's kind of about YouTube. In the time that I've been on here, I've noticed that there are generational cycles. There are, particularly in the philosophy and debate crowd, there are cycles of faces. There are people who kind of rise to prominence and become the go-to person for this, that, or the other. Whatever it is, they become the go-to person for. And here's the thing, and this is very rarely discussed in my experience. I certainly don't see it discussed often. And when it comes up on in discussions on Stick'em among the YouTube crowd, it's often met with shock. Like, it never occurred to us that this would be true. That after this rise to prominence, there is almost invariably a relatively short period of time before burnout occurs. That the people who were quote, the brightest and best even a year and a half ago probably aren't around anymore. And or they take long breaks, or they retool their channel, or they what have you. I mean, there are counterexamples, sure, but for the most part, this does seem to be true, that that the people who are most heavily invested in let's get some ideas going, man, tend to have pretty short burnout cycles. So the funny thing is that immediately after, there's a vacuum that's created. You know, so and so disappears. You know, the intellectual juggernaut of the season disappears, and a vacuum occurs, and there's a scramble that seems to happen. There's kind of a perpetual shuffling in terms of well, like the folks who are a little less well known. It seems a lot of people are kind of constantly scrambling to be the next fill in the blank. And the funny thing is that it seems, and this is like in discussions on Stick'em, this holds true, it never occurs to them to ask why. Why the guy who was the guy or the gal quit. They're fighting over a job with a very, very high turnover rate. No one gets fired. They all quit. Maybe it's worth asking why so many people quit this job. We watch from the cracked plastic edge of all things. Diminutive men in diminutive wars for scrap of road still smaller. Dust-compressed remains of our long-abandoned thrones, and before you think us prideful, that men should fall in battle for conquest of our refuse. Those thrones and roads propelled us here, to the precipice-cracked plastic end of all things, not to judge or rule, and never to soar. But a final simplicity, decisions so certain, to jump.